Welcome to the Behind the Girl Boss podcast, where every woman's journey takes center stage. Join us in this safe space as we explore the ins and outs of business, career, mental health, the music industry, and more. Whether you're a go-getter or a dream chaser, we've got stories for you. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok for an exclusive backstage pass. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and entertained. Welcome to the ride. Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back to the podcast. Hello, hi. I hope you guys are having a great day, great morning, great afternoon, great evening, whenever you're listening to this. I'm very sorry of how delayed this was. I was in Detroit from like Thursday to Saturday, and then I came back and I had so much work to do. And then I had things pop up and it was just a mess, but we're here and this episode's up and I'm really excited for it. Before we get into the episode, I want to do our little mantra of the week, of the day. And today's mantra is, even in uncertain times, I will handle it. I think that this goes without even saying, like, can relate to people in so many different aspects and so many different like situations. And I think I can take it in very like many situations in my life. So even in uncertain times, I will handle it. I'm very excited for you guys to listen to today's episode. It's such a good one. It was so inspiring, so moving, and just so much information that I didn't even know about. And I think it just informed me on a lot of things. So today on the podcast, we have Ali Cates. Ali is an entrepreneur and she basically talks all about trauma recovery, nervous system regulation, and she is your go-to for anxiety relief and trauma recovery. And she helps you connect to your body with many different proven methods. On this episode, we spoke all about what trauma is, how we feel it, how it can be impacted from our childhood. We spoke about why sometimes therapy misses the mark, and we spoke about how to set boundaries. And it was just such a good conversation, and I think you guys will enjoy it very much. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back to the podcast. So today we have Ali with us. So hi, Ali.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Ali Cates. I am a somatic experience practitioner and trauma recovery coach. So, what I help people do is to actually move the emotional charge out of their body because when we have trauma, it's stored in the body, not the brain. So, it's kind of like my quick Reader's Digest of what I do.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
excited to dive into all that with you. But before you do that, I like to do a little hot seat segment to kind of just break the ice and a little fun facts. So we were talking about before we started recording that you live in Northern California right now, but if you could pick up and move anywhere, where would it be?
oh my goodness. I would have to say probably New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like Queenstown, New Zealand is so incredible, but I really love where I live in the Bay Area. Like I love it so much. So I feel like I'm set where I am, but if I did have to pick up a move, I would say Queenstown in New
I love
Zealand.
that. I've never been to New Zealand, but it's definitely somewhere that I want to go one day.
It is incredible. The people are so nice, like literally so nice. You have to go.
I definitely will. Um, the next one is, do you have a life mantra or motto that you live by?
Yeah, I have a couple. One is it's okay to not be okay. I think that's my biggest thing. The second one my grandma used to always say to me is like, this too shall pass, like even when you're going
Yeah.
through a hard time. Um, and then I would think the last one would be like I have three. These are my three that I live by. My last one would be your past does not have to define your present or your future.
Yeah. I love that. I actually have a tattoo that says all will pass and it reminded me of the second one you said.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I love those. And then the last one is, who's a celebrity or creator that always keeps you inspired?
Oh my goodness. That's a good one. I feel like there are so many, and
Yeah.
I don't even know who it would have to be. I feel like I've been in like the personal branding space for a bit now, and I feel like the biggest thing is just like refining yourself. So I try not to
Mhm.
like look at other creators because I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes I get in my head about it. I'm like, oh, I could be doing more, but there's so many incredible people out there. Um, yeah, that's a hard one. I'm not really sure.
That's okay. I know there's so many people. I'm the same way. Like sometimes like I'll be like, oh my God, like I love these people's things. And then I'll get too deep into it and then like compare everything I do to them. And I'm like, okay, like let's take a step back.
Yeah.
Mm, I totally agree. But talking about like social media and everything and online, a lot of us do share a lot of our lives online. So something I like to ask everyone is what's something that you do for fun that many people may not know that you actually do?
I horseback ride. I do like show jumping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you been doing it for like a long time?
I did it a lot when I was a kid from like ages like 10 through 15.
Okay.
And then when my parents got divorced, I stopped horseback riding and I literally just got back into it like probably a year and a half ago. So I took about
So
15
fun.
years off, which is wild. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always good to like get back into something that you haven't done for like such a long time.
Yeah. I feel like your 30s are about going back and like doing what your 13-year-old self would have wanted to do. Like that's where I'm at.
I love that. I love to know that. Um,
Yeah.
so growing up, did you always see yourself working in the mental health space, or did you have a different path in mind?
Oh my gosh, girlfriend, no, not at all. I when I grew up, I first wanted to be a teacher, but then when I went to college in San Diego to be like the next Erin Andrews. Like I wanted to be on the side of the football field and like interviewing the
Mhm.
cute football players. Like I was like, this is what I'm gonna do. And I remember even like 6 years ago, you could not have like paid me enough to be in the mental health space. But what happened in my life was that, and this is kind of quick Reader's Digest of what happened, but um, 3.5 weeks before my husband and I were married, was diagnosed with late stage chronic Lyme disease and multiple other
Mhm.
autoimmune conditions. And we got back from our honeymoon, and I sat in an IV room for 9.5 months, 3 to 4 times a week, 6 to 8 hours a day. Got really, really sick. Um, and in that IV room was really when I started to create my own coaching business because I listened to a lot of people. And like the resounding thought was that people need a place to um, work through hard times and grieve and like really work through things that are going on in their mental health.
Yeah.
And prior to getting my diagnosis of Lyme disease, I had started like intense trauma recovery at 22 because I had all these really big memories come up from childhood that I had disassociated from,
Yeah.
like literally forgotten about. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, if you would have told me at even like the beginning of when I was 25, like January of, I don't even know what year that was, 2019, that like you would be starting a coaching business
Hmm.
in the next, 10 months, I would have been like, you're high as a kite. Like, there's no way. Um, but yeah, I'm really grateful to be here and I'm really like, there's nothing else that I would want to do.
Yeah. No, I love that. Um, as we were talking about before, like I also talk like a lot about my mental health and stuff. And I recently got back into therapy too. And it's just so wild to me because I've been dealing with so many different things. And through therapy, I've been realizing a lot of it does come from like my childhood and like high school
Mm.
specifically. And some of the things I would like, I didn't even remember happening until I like dug deep and I was like, wow, like that happened and that's affecting me like now at like 25. So you spoke about this a little bit, but when we talk about like trauma and mental health, why is this particularly something that like you're really passionate about?
Yeah. So at kind of like I'll rewind a little bit. So at 22, I had this like really big kind of mental health break and everything
Mhm.
on paper was perfect. Like my then boyfriend, now husband, and I moved in together. My parents bought us a home. Like everything on paper is perfect, literally, right? And I remember my mental health just crashed so hard. And I'm like, why is this happening? Everything is perfect. And it's
Yeah.
because when everything gets kind of perfect and you've been living in fight or flight is when all of the stuff starts to come up that you've been suppressing. And so during that time, I went on like a mental health quest. I tried everything. I had been in talk therapy like on and off since I was in
Hmm.
like fourth grade, right? And like nothing really seemed to move the needle, but I
Yeah.
tried all these things like EMDR, hypnotherapy, psychotherapy, brain rewiring, like all of the things that people come to me and I'm like, yep, tried it, like Reiki, like all this stuff that I'm like, I'm trying all this stuff. And I remember nothing really seemed to shift. And especially in like therapy and CBT, all these
Hmm.
things, I always feel like there was still this like kind of charge that I had in my body. And it was at that time that I reached out to a trauma coach in town and he was like, you're not going to believe me, but I've been working with veterans for 40 years and what you're experiencing is trauma. And I was like, there's no way I haven't been to war. Like I have this like
Hmm.
mentality that there's no way I can have trauma and like blonde haired, blue eyes, like Like, there's no way that this can be the thing, right? And he's like, yeah. And you also have complex developmental trauma, which is like a whole nother kind of layer of trauma. And so I went to him and he did like myofascial release, like work, like Reiki, and like working with like the body actually to like actually move the trauma out of the body. And I literally had never had someone do like myofascial release. And
Mm.
it like, it completely changes the game, right? Like, it actually allows your body to express that what happened in the past, right? So when you
Yeah.
were having like a traumatic event, actually being able to express that from your body is huge. And that completely like shifted my own mental health, because I felt like someone could actually hear me, and then I actually was able to move this charge that I had felt, so deeply in my body. Because trauma is not stored in the brain, and that's why talk therapy only gets you so far, right?
Yeah.
Because like, if you've had trauma, your thinking brain goes offline. So you can't out think or out talk or out negotiate your trauma. It's stored in your body. And I knew this so deeply, right? And when trauma gets stored in the body for too long, it starts to manifest in autoimmune illness, cancer, etc. So I was having like physical also representations of storing trauma for so long.
Yeah. And I think what you said before, like when you were like, oh, like I can't have trauma, I think a lot of us think that way too. And I thought that way as well because I was always like, nothing like very big happened. Or like when people talk about trauma, it's always about like war or like abuse in like some sort like form. And I never experienced that. So I was always like, well, like I don't have trauma. Like that's not like a thing. But trauma comes in like so many different ways and it's different for everyone. So I think that's important to like know. Um,
Yeah. And
but
on that note, I can
yeah.
speak to that just really quickly. So I think that's really important is like, I had multiple big T traumas, right? Like raped, had sexual assault in my
Hmm.
childhood, like these really big T
Yeah.
traumas. But I've worked with so many clients that here's the thing is trauma is not about what happened to you, it's about how it stayed in your nervous system after
Yeah.
the event. So if you have enough little T traumas in your system, they can sit in your body like a big T trauma,
Hmm.
right? So I think we're always like, oh, well, I wasn't raped or I didn't have
Yeah.
sexual abuse, right? So you're like, oh, this can't be a thing. But that's not the case. I've had people that have come into my practice and have had multiple little T traumas. And I'm like, wow, your nervous system is really stuck on
Hmm.
flight or on freeze, right?
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree. And when we're talking about like therapy, sometimes like therapy isn't all that you need, like you were speaking about. So where do
Yeah.
you believe that therapy kind of falls short in addressing mental health challenges?
Yeah. So therapy, I think, is really great. Like, one, I'm a proponent for doing anything that moves the needle for you,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Therapy is great to validate what has happened, right? But like I mentioned before, is that trauma is stored in the body, not the brain. So when you are in a traumatic event, your thinking brain, right, your prefrontal cortex goes offline. And when you are in talk therapy, that's what you're working with is your
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex. So if that thing is offline, it's like you're not speaking the same language, right? So that's where it falls short because you actually need to be able to get in the body and feel like what
Hmm.
happened and be able to process those old emotions through the body. So I think talk therapy can be so incredible for validating what's happened and for digging deeper and for having a safe space for support. But if you've been through any sort of trauma, it's really important to get that nervous system work done.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are some tools or strategies that you think women particularly can incorporate into their daily lives to improve their own mental health?
Yeah, I think like the first thing is acknowledging your emotions. I think this is
Hmm.
something that we just don't do. We're like, yeah, I'm pissed, but like I'm just pissed. Like, and we
Yeah.
don't really get any deeper into like what we're actually feeling. So there's like a emotions wheel that you can even look up online. It's called the emotions wheel. And it has like the major emotions and then it kind of teases out to these other emotions. So like sadness can tease out even deeper. And I
Yeah.
would say that's the first thing is like really getting deep on like what's this emotion that you're actually feeling. And then the second thing is that if you are, this is kind of like pro status here,
Hmm.
but acknowledging like where does that emotion live in your body? So like if you're sad, do you hold that in your throat? Do you hold it in your stomach? Is it in your head? Like, and just connecting it to the body. And then the third piece I would say is just like trying to like sit with it for a second and then being able to move on. So like, okay, this is the emotion. I'm having sadness. It's in my throat. And like, I'm going to continue to move forward because especially if you get into that like ruminating thoughts and you're like constantly thinking about like, oh
Yeah.
my God, the sadness is in my throat, right? Like, and then being able to have like maybe a mantra or something like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge this for a second. I'm going to put my timer on my phone for 10 seconds and then I'm going to go back to the task that I was doing.
Yeah. And if someone's able to like acknowledge like, okay, like my sadness is, I don't know, in my throat, or like for me,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think it like stores in my like stomach, which like reflects a lot
Mm,
of like like issues that I
yes.
have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how do you like what would you suggest people like start doing to kind of process it and
Hmm.
help themselves? Because I feel like everyone deals with it and like no one really knows how to help themselves sometimes.
Yeah, so I would say that like this is what's so interesting right now, and I know that you know this because you're so in like the digital space, right? Is that everyone's posting everything to do about nervous system regulation and
Mm-hmm.
trauma. And so like just coming from a trauma informed lens is that it's really important to work with someone because if you are doing these like quick exercises that you see on social media, that can re-traumatize you if you don't have someone there to help you. So I'm just gonna like blanket statement
Yeah,
that before I go into like what I'm gonna
100%.
say. But you always want sound, breath, and movement when you're moving trauma out of the body. So you want some type of like sound, you want some a breath, you want to be breathing through it, and then you want some type of movement. So even if that's like you're standing up, you're like making sound, you're breathing, and you're like shaking your hands out, right? Like and letting your body move to like move some of this charge, that can be helpful. Um, but yeah, I would say that like discharging is what you're talking about, and that like just from my context needs to be done with a practitioner because I see so many people that are like, "Oh, have you seen this workout that you can do to release trauma from your hips?" And I'm like, "Yes." And also what happens if you be like if that pops up if a really traumatic memory pops up while you're doing that and you don't have someone there with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, to process it. Like you're all alone and then like
Yeah.
I wouldn't know what to do. Like if like
Yeah.
I was yeah.
Yeah. Well, and speaking on that is like how I can kind of give you an example of how
Hmm.
trauma is stored in the body. This like helps people is that so like what happens when we go into fight or flight and you're talking about discharge, right? Like I don't know if you've seen these videos on, do you know what
I've
I'm
seen
talking about?
some of
Like
them.
the
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, where they're like shake your hips and I'm like, "Ooh, okay." But what happens when you get into fight or flight is I'm going to draw a circle at the top. Is at the top you have a trigger and then you go into fight or flight and then the bottom you have a discharge and then you go into rest and digest. So this is like parasympathetic, this is like trendy what we talk about here, right? So imagine you're like a little, for all my imagery people out there, like imagine you're a little bunny rabbit out in the wild, you're like munching on some grass, and then over your right hand shoulder you hear like a crack, like a branch leaf crack, and you turn around and you see there's a coyote. That's going to
yeah.
be a trigger for you to run, right?
Yeah.
Then you're going to go in a fight or flight, you're going to run, then you're going to run somewhere where you're actually safe. And the bunny rabbit's going to have a discharge. It's going to shake, it's going to cry, it's going to make noises, it's going to do whatever it's going to do. Then it's going to hop off and take a little nap, right? Most of us get stuck going from triggered to fight or flight and triggered to fight or flight, and we build this emotional
Yeah.
charge, right? We never get to that discharge place. So that's why when you see these videos on TikTok and everything, they're like, discharge that pain. It's like, if you've never done that before, that can be absolutely terrifying.
Hmm. Yeah, I've never personally done that, so I wouldn't even know like what it's like or like how to move. Because I feel like once you like discharge, like how do you move from like I wouldn't know how to get over that or like whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But talking about being a trauma coach, how did you kind of transition from what you were doing before to
Mhm.
this field? How was that transition like?
Yeah. Well, before I got sick, I was working at a nonprofit, and that was kind of like, I was like, this is it. I'm like helping
Yeah.
people and I'm raising all this money and I've made it, you know? Um, and moving into this space, it was really like an ego death or like dark night of the soul or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like, because I had to quit my job and sit in this IB room, it's like I knew on my good days, I was like, this is building me up. Like, this has to be breaking me down to build me
Yeah.
back up into the person I need to be. So for me, there was really no choice. It was like you either make the best out of this or you just are going to sit here and like continue to get sicker and sicker and not advocate for yourself to get out of this IV room,
Yeah.
right? So for me, it's a little bit different of a story. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, now I'm going to go into mental health
Yeah.
space. Because like this is what I really, it was like everything just kind of aligned. And because I sat in this Ivy room with so many other walks of life and like really listened to what they were going through, I just kept on thinking, and this was before COVID, this was before everyone really started focusing on mental health. Like I was like, oh, people need a place to come and like, work through this. And originally it was going to be like a retreat idea.
Mhm.
And then it moved into coaching because of just the pandemic and everything.
Yeah. And do you need like certain certifications to become like a trauma coach? And what is that like?
Yes, 100%. Please, please.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Yes. So, trauma informed coaching, I got it through um ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation. So they have like all these other kind of branches where you can do like life coaching or
Yeah.
mental health coaching, etc. So I did it through Moving the Human Spirit, which is up in Canada. And then right now, going through the somatic experience practitioner training through Peter Levine, who wrote the book Waking the Tiger. Have you ever seen that book? There's like a tiger on the front. It's called Waking the Tiger. So currently studying under him. So yes, 100%. There needs to be some type, just because you've been through trauma, you can't help other people go through it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't even know what to like tell someone or how to help someone. So can you kind of describe the role of a trauma coach and what clients can expect from working with someone like you?
Yeah. So the role for me and what I focus on is helping people move that emotional charge.
Mhm.
So I'm doing a lot of like somatic experiencing with them to help complete that cycle that I had talked about. Because people are really in fight or flight these days. And I think this can also play into like being on social media.
Yeah.
We see so much stuff right now on social media that it overwhelms our bodies. So it's about helping people, complete those cycles and actually get into that rest and digest spot. But yeah, so working one-on-one with clients, doing VIP days. I have a self-paced course as well.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with social media. Like as someone who works in this space,
Yes,
the
yeah,
amount
tell
of
me.
times, yeah, the amount of times I like compare myself to other people, especially like because I have like a digital agency. So like those people, I will compare myself all the time and like I have to like take a step back because I overwhelm myself and then like I set myself in this place where like I'm overthinking everything. And
Yeah.
even like just like regular like not regular people but like people who aren't in the space just like posting online and like seeing their growth and then like I compare it to my own and I don't know how to like not do that or like
Mm.
I feel like every time I go online I'm always like comparing something.
Yeah. How is that? Because I know for you, because you run an agency and you're also in the space, like, do you ever find that you need to like take a break or you're like, oh my gosh, I can't take a break because this is what I do for a living? It's
I
okay.
think it's like in the middle because like this summer, for example, I went on vacation for 2 weeks and I went to Europe and I was like, hey, I'm not going to work in Europe. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
here to like sit in a hotel and work. But taking those 2 weeks off, I swear every single day I was like, I should be doing something. Like, if I'm not doing something, then I'm like falling
Mhm.
behind or like, I don't even know what I thought was going to happen. Like, it's literally 2 weeks. But in my head, 2 weeks was like a year. And I was like,
Yeah.
people are going to get like ahead of me and then I'm going to fall. Yeah. So it's very difficult to take a break and even in the daytime sometimes too like because it's not like a 9 to 5 traditional so like I don't really have like a end time so I just like do it myself but I find it hard to like kind of shut off and not work so sometimes like at 10 p.m. I'm like doing stuff and I'm like I should like literally be relaxing like focusing on myself so I think like that is something that I'm trying to work on because every single person needs time to just relax and do nothing that has to do with work and capacities. And I feel like I'm always working and it's hard to like not do that.
Yeah. I actually listened to this podcast. It was with Caitlin Bristow, and
Mhm.
I forget her name, but I will give it to you. I want to say her name's Emily. And she was a trauma therapist, and she was talking about how she was helping all these people get out of fight or flight, but she felt like she was still in fight or flight. And she said she did this whole study about like getting off of your phone, etc. And it's wild just like how much when we see stuff on social media, it can create this fight or flight response in us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this person's doing this thing and oh my gosh, they're getting the thing that I want, right? Like,
Yeah.
or they're getting the client that I want, or they're getting the interview that I want or whatever. And it can just keep us in this cycle of like almost like there's a tiger that's attacking us when like
Yeah.
nothing is actually happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel like all the time. And I'm like literally I can be in the best mood and then I'll go on my phone and like I'm scrolling through TikTok or like Instagram and then all of a sudden I'm like
Yep.
overthinking something that I wasn't thinking about before.
Yes.
And then I'm like, okay, like what do I do now?
Yeah. No, it's so insane. I mean, I find that I'm not like, I mean, I create content, right? Like I run an
Hmm.
online business, but I can't imagine being in it all the time like that. Like, do you have to put boundaries on it? Or are you finding that like you need to put boundaries on it?
Yeah. So also like so I own a digital agency, right? And then
Yeah.
I have this podcast and I also do YouTube. So I feel like
Oh,
I'm
wow.
yeah, I'm
You're
like
all over.
in all these different spaces. So I'm comparing myself to so many different people because there's not just one person to compare myself to. There's like all these people. So I'm definitely trying to like learn what boundaries fit with me. What I've been
Yeah.
trying to do recently, because I used to be with those like one of those people that like will fall asleep right after I'm on TikTok, like scrolling for like hours. So now what I've tried to do is like put my phone away at night and like read before I go to sleep. Haven't been
Hell
doing
yeah.
the best at it, but I'm trying
Yeah.
to like incorporate that. But yeah, like I'm trying to not be on my phone as much, but then it's hard because when I'm like posting for clients or like editing for clients, I have to like be on my phone or my laptop and like on those spaces. So it's hard to find like a middle ground to just like enjoy social media and like have fun with it, but also working
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure it's hard because like you have to be on the trends, you know,
Yeah.
because that's like what part of your job is. Yeah. I always tell my clients too, and I try to do this as much as I can. It's like I'll put my phone in the other room because
Hmm.
it's so tempting to just roll over and like grab your phone.
Yeah.
And then I won't get on my phone the first hour of waking because that's really when your body needs to like wake up and regulate the hormones and all of that stuff. But it's hard when you're like, oh my goodness, I'm like, it feels like another appendix almost. Like,
Yeah.
or like, is that the right word? Not
I
appendix.
don't know, but I
You
know
know what
what
I
you
mean?
mean. It's like, yeah, like,
Another limb. Like your
yeah, it's like a
phone is
part of
like you
me.
take, yes, like you take it everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. So talking about your coaching again, is it online only or do you do like in-person stuff too?
Yeah, both online
Okay.
and in person. Yep.
And how do you kind of make sure to create like a safe and supportive environment, especially online? Because I feel like
Mm,
in person, it's easier to like feel people's energy. I mean, online you
yeah.
can too, but it's a little bit different. So how do you make sure to create that space?
Yeah. I mean, with all of my calls, I try to make sure that like my background, this is huge just for like nervous system
Hmm.
and trauma informed stuff, that my background is firm. So like
Okay.
I don't have a door behind me or like a window behind me because I want people that is something that people are like looking for unconsciously is like where's something in the room that's going to show up. So like I'll try to have a background where like people know that like okay, this is firm, there's no door, right? That's like the first thing. And the second thing is just like getting to know people. Like I feel like we've kind of lost the art a little bit right now of just
Hmm.
being curious about like what's going on in people's day, how are they doing? Like when I'm with a client, like we get to know each other
Yeah.
well, right? And I also show that I'm like not perfect with my clients. Not. I feel
Hmm.
like, especially when you're going to like a professional, you're like, oh, they should have it all together and they're always regulated and all this stuff. And I'm like, they see that like I'm not always regulated. And that's the point of this work is to learn
Yeah.
how, when that happens, how to like reset your body, right?
Hmm.
So I try to be like as real and honest and open with my clients as I can because I feel like especially in this line of work, they have been lied to around stuff like, and that's how trauma has been created, right? Or the thing that they
Yeah.
thought was happening wasn't like was either yeah, I mean like there's so much mistrust when you come in with trauma, right? So I try to be just really upfront. I'm like, this is who I am, this is what we're getting, you know, like this is how you can work with me, etc. So I try to just be myself.
Yeah. I think that's important too for like the person you're speaking to share a bit because it just like humanizes you. And I feel
Hmm.
like it just makes, well, at least for me, like more comfortable speaking to someone, knowing that like, okay, like they get it type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Or they've gone through it. Yeah.
Can you kind of share your perspective on the long-term journey of healing from trauma? Because
Mm.
obviously, as much as it would be great if that it went away overnight, it doesn't, and it's like a journey and a process. So, can you share a bit of that process?
Yeah. Oh, how long do we have? No, I'm kidding. So that's a great question. So I always like to think of the healing journey like a spiral staircase. And so
Hmm.
everything that you've worked through at kind of like step one is going to come with you at step two, and it might be just a different layer, right? So if you're like, oh, I worked through my anger at step one towards this person, and then you like take a step up the spiral staircase, you're like, I'm still kind of angry, but it's like you're at a deeper level. And so if you've ever been up a spiral staircase, it's like you're going up, but you're kind of, it feels like you're going in a circle, but you're still
Hmm.
moving upwards. And that's how I feel the healing journey is, right? Is like, I think a lot right now, which is incredible after COVID is and during COVID is we're talking a lot about mental health and et cetera. But right now it almost seems kind of like trendy and almost
Yeah.
like toned down a little bit. And I feel like that's what's hard for people that have been through trauma is like it takes longer than 3 months. Sometimes it
Yeah.
takes longer than years, right? Because depending on what you're coming in with, it's like your body didn't get in fight or flight in 3 months. Like maybe it got in fight or, but it like stayed in chronic fight or flight for years, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're undoing. And I've always found just on my own personal healing journey is I'm like, oh my God, I'm healed, you know? And then it's like you go to the next level and you're like, just kidding, you're not,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a constant kind of evolution. And I think being committed to the process and just, digging deeper with yourself, sometimes those things are uncomfortable. To like
Yeah.
learn stuff about yourself that isn't fun to learn.
Yeah. No, it's funny that you say that because that's technically like what I'm going through right now. And like,
Mm,
I was talking about like healing from things from like high school and stuff. And when I talk about that, I came out in high school as bisexual like when I was 16, and it wasn't the best experience. And I kind
mm,
of didn't even realize that I carried that with me to now. And it's still like is a part of me, and it still stresses me out whenever I talk about like sexuality sometimes because I'm like, oh my God, like are people going to say something? Are people going to like, I don't know. So I think it's like something that I carried with me for so long and I'm still like healing through it almost 10 years later. And I'm not in like a healed place from it still. And it still can trigger me sometimes. So yeah, like you said, like sometimes some certain things take years and like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, like I'm so fine with it now. And then something will happen. I'm like, never mind. Like I'm actually like still in that place.
yeah, I feel like that's the humbling part of it is that there's like, and I always think of like trauma as like these wounds, right? Like we have these, like if you have like a wound on your arm and imagine
Mm-hmm.
you've like bandaged it up for a long time and then you're slowly unbandaging it and like it's still a wound, it's like a gaping wound. And
Mm-hmm.
then when that wound starts to heal, it becomes a scar. And I don't know if you've had any like big scars, but for me, it's like the scars sometimes, like I have a scar on my neck that like sometimes it will like shake and it will like tremor because I'm like turning my neck the wrong way, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, I forgot about that thing for so long. Like I
Yeah.
forgot about that surgery, but it's still there, right? And I feel like that's similar with
Yeah.
these wounds that we've been through is you're like, oh yeah, it is kind of hurting today. Or like,
Hmm.
oh my God, someone did trigger the hell out of me. And like I thought that that was a healed thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And talking about this too, like I'm a very empathetic person, and when like people close
Mm,
to me are going through things, I like take it on as if it's my own struggles. So how do
yeah.
you kind of protect your own mental health and just your own well-being while hearing everyone else's stories and working with them through it?
Oh my gosh. I'm still doing the work, right?
Hmm.
Because, if I, yeah, this is so interesting that you bring this up. So in our training, we learn that like if someone comes in and has a very similar story to you, which typically you kind of attract those people, 'cause that's like they can
Yeah.
resonate with you, right? It's going to bring your stuff up, right? And it's like my mentor always says it's like the quick and dirty way to healing, because it's going to bring your stuff up right to the surface that you thought you've worked through, and it's going to allow you the space to work through it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's definitely, I mean, I feel like that is part of being in the mental health space. You're hearing some really intense, um, really traumatic things, and
Yeah.
you're sitting with people in that space. And also because we're doing like nervous system, body work, like you're feeling also the charge of what people are kicking
Yeah.
off of their bodies, right? So it's like, it's intense, but for me, something that like helps me get through that is like I've personally felt how incredible that is when someone is holding safe space for you and
Mm-hmm.
they're not taking it personally, right?
Yeah.
I think whenever we say like, "Oh, this is what's happened to me," then people are like, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" Like, and they make it about
Yeah. It
themselves,
takes
and
it.
they're trying
Yeah.
to comfort themselves, right? But when like I know how it feels when someone's been able to hold that space for me and be like, "I'm not making this about me. You get all the space that you
Mm-hmm.
need." And that's what I try to do for clients. But like, of course, I'm human, right? It still
Yeah.
brings up my own stuff. And so that's why like I have to continually work on it so that I can be
Yeah.
clear for my clients. So I'm not bringing stuff into my own stuff into their sessions, right?
Yeah. For sure. So last night our podcast, I asked people on Instagram to ask you questions, and I picked two of my favorite ones.
Oh
So
my
the
gosh, I
first
love
one
this.
is, if you were not in this career path, what do you think you would be doing right now?
Oh my goodness. Um, wow.
It's funny because when you feel like you're in like the right career path for you,
Yeah,
when you think about it, you're like, I don't even know what I would be doing.
I really don't. Like, I think that there's so many different like avenues that I could take off of mental health. What's really interesting that came up is that I wanted to create like a sober app for like people
Okay.
that are sober that could like be friends together and like
Mm-hmm.
go out. So I feel like that that's still kind of in the healing space. I don't know. I feel really grateful for where I'm at,
Yeah.
like truly. And I think it used to piss me off when I would hear people say that because I used to not feel that for such a long
Yeah.
time. But yeah, I don't know. Nothing. I think I'd be here.
Yeah. Well, I love that.
Yeah.
It's good to know that like you're in the right place. It's like a good feeling because like even before like when I was like in another like career path or like I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So like each time when like people are like, "Oh, like I'm in my dream career path and I love it and I would never change it," I'd always be like, "Must be nice." But now
Yeah.
being in that place, I'm like, "Oh, like it's fun."
It's good, yeah. And there's so many different avenues that you can take, Like I feel like when you are a business owner, you're like, oh, it could be this, or this is how I see my business growing. So I love that. I love being an entrepreneur. I love being challenged. Like I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Hmm. Yeah. And then the last question is, what advice would you give to an aspiring trauma coach or professional interested in specializing in this field?
Hmm. Do your own work.
Yeah.
Like literally do your own work. Um, yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Straightforward. Well, that's all I had for you today. So thank you so much again for coming on and sharing your story and making this like a safe, vulnerable space. Before you leave, do you want to shout out any of your socials, where people can find you, where they can work with you?
Yeah, so everything is alliecates.co. That's TikTok, Instagram, I think all of the things. It's also my website. And then I would love to give your listeners too, if they're interested, like 20% off of my self-paced course.
For sure.
Yeah,
I could put like a code or something.
what do you want the code to be?
It could literally be like BTGB.
Okay, BTBG20.
BTGB20. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, let's do that.
Perfect. Well, I'll leave that in the show notes. But thank you so much again for coming on and sharing everything.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I really do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to go follow Ali on all her socials. Go show her some love, support, go work with her. Don't forget that we have a code and it will be in the description. Go check her out. Go show her some love. If you want to follow me, please don't be shy. You can follow me either at Behind the Girl Boss or at It's Amanda Wan. You can check out my YouTube channel, It's Amanda Wan. I'm posting there whenever I want at this point. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye, guys.